Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's already been so fun. Looking forward to the rest of today. I think there's going to be a lot of resonances between this talk and the last one, especially. So I look forward to chatting. Um, so I sort of, as I go through, I'm going to say a little bit about how this paper came to be. So I think I'll start by just like launching straight in. But before I do that, the one thing I do want to say is that I've been trying to kind of like resist the like AI artification of PowerPoints. So I've got loads of like like random pieces of artwork on some of these slides. They don't have anything to do with the rest of the slides. So don't worry if you're not paying attention to them. Okay. So I'm going to start out by defining some really basic terms in philosophy of mind. I think that these should be familiar to some people in the room, but it's always good to have a reminder. Um, Computational functionalism is the idea that, oh, and I've got lost already. Computational functionalism is the idea that cognition consists of the rule-governed transformation of mental representations. So computational functionalism suggests that mental states can be realized multiply, that the functional software of any cognitive computation can run on various kinds of hardware. Despite enjoying a long, if not unchallenged, reign in 20th century philosophy of mind, computational functionalism has lately fallen somewhat from favor, in part for the rather ironic reason that advances in machine learning have kind of laid bare the many dissimilarities between human and artificial intelligences. The displacement of computational functionalism has prompted theorists to consider a number of alternative frameworks. And I follow Anil Seth in proposing that many of these frameworks can be united under the banner of biological naturalism, which Seth defines as a family of ideas that stress intimate connections between properties of biological systems and properties of mind, including consciousness. This current runs variously through inactivist theories, embodies accounts of predictive processing, and the biogenic approach research program. Although biological naturalism need not necessarily lead to non-computational understandings of cognition, many of its advocates have suggested that the kinds of information processing involved in cognition are not best described in computational terms. If living systems are those in which cognition arose, then there is good reason to think that cognition is somehow dependent on the material features of those systems. And if this is the case, then the functional operations at play, even if multiply realizable, must be fine-grained enough to encompass the relevant organic processes. So it's kind of difficult to see how cognition can be equated with the rule-governed transformation of representations in any way that corresponds to rules and representations in traditional computers. Okay, now for another definition, the group mind hypothesis. This is the idea that some collectives of cognitive agents themselves qualify as legitimate cognitive systems or minds in their own right. The group mind hypothesis is often understood as an undesirable consequence of the kind of computational functionalism that biological naturalists want to get away from. The most famous critique of this kind is Ned Block's China brain, which states that on a functionalist account, a population the size of China could, if correctly organized, produce a mind. Block uses this thought experiment as an argument against functionalism on the grounds that there is a kind of prima facie doubt as to whether there is anything it is like to be the China brain. And many other theorists have argued against the possibility of group minds. I really can't stress this enough. Philosophers hate the idea of group minds. It's often totally repellent as a conclusion. I will argue here, however, that the group mind hypothesis is in fact entailed by many versions of biological naturalism. This paper thus poses the same challenge to biological naturalism that Block's China brain posed to functionalist computationalism, but with a caveat, I don't think that the argument is a kind of mortal blow against biological naturalism. I argue that the biological naturalist has multiple options when confronted with the group mind challenge, including embracing the wacky possibility of group minds. Yes, the biological naturalist can embrace the possibility of group minds, but to pursue any of the routes, they'll need to articulate just which biological systems properly count as cognitive. And so I started writing this paper because I'm a historian, and I was sort of studying a lot of people in the early 20th century, early organicists, sociologists, and a lot of them were biological naturalists, as we'd now describe them, and a lot of them believed in group minds. And so part of the impetus for this paper is thinking like, were these people all crazy? Like, or did they have a kind of a sort of respectable dialectical chain at work that I've tried to sort of trace out here? Yeah, so, ooh, the purpose of this paper is twofold. One, to stress the importance of biological ontology for naturalistic accounts of cognition. If we want to restrict cognitive capacities to living things, we're going to need to articulate clearly what it means to be both living and a thing. And two, to strengthen biological naturalism by outlining how it might deal with ontological problems using group minds as an illuminating case study. So this is going to be, I'm afraid, a kind of like annoying paper. I know philosophers always like when you have a strong argument. This isn't really like one strong argument. It's a kind of map of different ways that you could go if you accept different conditions in this argument. Okay. But wait, I hear you ask, because you're all diligent philosophers, what even is a mind? We're talking about group minds. What is a mind? Intentionality, sentience, consciousness, something entirely different. My thin definition here is just going to be that mindedness is a form of phenomenality beyond mere problem-solving intelligence. This definition is deliberately capacious. Different conceptions of mind could be plugged in here without major perturbation to my argument, but note that it is a realist definition of mind, so it suggests that some things have minds, and this isn't just a matter of our attitude or intentional stance towards them. Okay, so many biological naturalists claim that living systems are cognitive systems, and living is a process of cognition, along with this kind of famous formulation by Maturana and Varela. So this is what Andy Clark calls the strong version of the life-mind continuity thesis, which would obtain if the basic concepts needed to understand the organization of life turned out to be central to a proper scientific understanding of mind. When called upon to articulate these basic concepts, naturalists tend to reach for models of dynamic self-maintenance. Matt Sims distinguishes two major strands within this approach: self-organizing complex systems theories, such as the free energy principle, which see cognition, life, as the process by which an organism maintains a thermodynamically improbable, non-equilibrium steady state, and autopoietic theories, which understand cognition in terms of an organism's capacity to produce its own identity by distinguishing itself from its milieu. However, the boundaries between these strands are often a bit blurry, with theorists likely to cast autopoiesis in terms of free energy minimization or vice versa. However, the naturalist isn't committed to the strong life-mind continuity theory. They might adopt a much weaker stance in which, as Peter Godfrey Smith writes, I think that's a very nice summary, although anything that has a mind is alive, not everything that is alive has a mind. On this account, the physiological features of life, such as self-organization, metabolism, evolution, might indeed be extricable from faculties traditionally associated with mind, even if the former provide a necessary basis for the latter. Perhaps living matter is minimally agential, but only more complex beings are truly minded. However, as Matt Sims points out, biological naturalists will need to appeal to a continuum regarding this chosen mark of the mental in order to avoid simply collapsing back into an anthropocentric approach. Because if they're not committed to the idea that cognition and life are like synonymous, they are at least committed to the idea that cognition emerged through evolutionary processes. To summarize, the biological naturalist is required to adopt some variation on the life-mind continuity thesis, weak or strong. But they won't have told us at this point exactly what kinds of things have minds. If they adopt weak life-mind continuity, they'll need to answer the question, which living systems are cognitive? If they adopt strong life-mind continuity, they'll need to answer the question, which systems are living? So in what follows, I'm just going to consider various ways in which these questions might be approached, and then I'll consider the ways in which these conclusions might entail the group mind hypothesis. So let's start with the question facing strong life-mind continuity. Which systems are living? The question of how to define life, as you all know, is a bit of a hard problem in philosophy of science. There is no real scientific or philosophical consensus on the definition of life. Because biological naturalists want to stress the discontinuities between living and non-living matter, as we've seen, it makes sense to reach for models of dynamic self-organization. Here, I don't want to accept or reject these definitions outright, but I want to note that because they foreground agency, they rest on being able to locate biological agents. So beings that can be self-organized, selves that can be organized, that can be sort of autopoiesicized. So is a shoal of fish an autopoietic system in its own right? is a heart or a fetus, or are these groups of autopoietic systems parts of autopoietic systems or pre-autopoietic systems? These are all questions of biological ontology, so what it means to be an individuated biological thing. But let's park these issues for a minute and turn to the question facing weak life-mind continuity: which living systems are cognitive? One way to assess which biological systems are cognitive agents would be via an empirical research program in which scientists try to locate defined marks of the mental across the biosphere. Different marks might be suggested, but those listed by Lyon and co. here are typical: orienting response, discrimination, memory, valence, decision-making, etc. The basal cognition framework is a research program seeking to empirically locate these kinds of cognitive traits in unicellular life, on the grounds that commonalities between human and, say, like bacterial information processing are mechanistic, not metaphorical. And people are particularly obsessed with slime molds in this domain. If we can scale down cognition to entities like slime molds, can we scale up cognition to groups such as animal flocks and human crowds? A wealth of empirical research demonstrates that many of the marks of the mental identified by advocates of the basal cognition framework may also be exhibited by groups of this nature. It's been suggested that learning, decision-making, sensory detection, joint motion, and valence, to name only a few, obtain at the group level in a range of human and animal contexts. And this is kind of relatively uncontroversial. The controversial thing is when we extrapolate from the presence of these traits to the presence of genuine cognition. But if a naturalist wishes to adopt a kind of basal cognition research program, then they must enact this kind of extrapolation. They might wish to suggest that these markers may come in degrees so as to indicate only weak or minimal cognitive capacity, but in this case one could argue that groups like something like slime molds would display a weak or minimal but nevertheless legitimate cognitive capacity. So we might just put down stricter guidelines about which living systems count as cognitive. This would mean finding marks of the mental that, although empirically discernible, would disqualify very simple organisms and with them perhaps groups. So we see this in the kind of LSE research program for identifying sentience, which identifies not only associative learning and flexible self-protection, these kinds of things, but integrated nociception and analgesia, among, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, analgesia, among other traits as required features. Here too, however, it seems possible to kind of scale up to the group level, even if we can't scale down to basal life. For if individuals within a group possess something like analgesic preferences, might it be possible to suggest that the group as a whole does too? Research in both human and animal groups suggests that shoals and flocks tend to act synchronously in response to intrusive stimuli and perceived threats, and that affects, including physical pain, can be socially mediated in these contexts. Why should it be that we describe this as many cognitive individuals acting in concert rather than a larger cognitive individual acting as one? So one reason why might be this word that came up in this criteria for identifying sentience, which is integration. So integrated nociception, sensory integration. When does a biological system become integrated enough to qualify for potential sentience? When does it become integrated enough to count as a single thing? So this, again, is a question of biological ontology. So just to sum up where we've got to right now, I think if you are committed to biological naturalism, you need to be either a weak or strong life-mind continuity person. If you adopt weak mind-life continuity, then you're faced with this question: which living systems are cognitive? If you provide us with a list of salient features, then we're going to need to ask which systems are integrated enough to possess these. This is a question of biological ontology. And if you adopt the strong life-mind position, then you're faced with this question: which systems are living? If you appeal to dynamic self-maintenance, then we also have this question: which systems are selves? And again, we're at this question of what biological individuality could mean in this context. So, what is a biological individual? Let's turn to this question. This diagram shows the conceptual space of possible biological individuals provided by Robert Wilson and Matthew Barker. So we could incorporate all these possible individuals into our biological ontology on the grounds that perhaps a biological individual is just any object that some part of biology recognizes as worth describing. If a biological naturalist suggests that all biological individuals are cognitive and that anything described by biology is a biological individual, it again seems easy to make a case for the existence of group minds. It would be uncontroversial to base groups of humans in like region 5 here, seeing as this category is also occupied by herds, populations, and species. But this obviously would commit the naturalist to extending cognitive capacities to herds, populations, and species, as well as things like genes and viruses and hearts. So assuming that they want to avoid this wacky conclusion, how might they restrict their ontology accordingly? One way would be to adopt a more conservative view and equate biological individuals specifically with Darwinian individuals, which is denoted by this kind of dot dash line there. So building on Lewontin's classic statement that natural selection takes place in any collection of entities in which there is variation, hereditary and differences in reproductive success, Peter Godfrey Smith, who was getting a shout out yesterday, I also just, everything he writes, so useful. He picks out 3 features needed for selection to obtain: a genetic bottleneck between generations, reproductive specialization across parts of an individual, and overall integration. And various kinds of biological individuals can be mapped across this space. But note that animal groups, so buffalo herd in this example, score low, very low on all counts. Unlike eusocial insect colonies, in which there is a division of reproductive labor across the whole hive or colony, reproductive specialization in a herd does not extend beyond each individual buffalo. So when the buffalo reproduces, it does so as an individual, not on behalf of the herd. Moreover, the herd experiences nothing like a genetic bottleneck in the way of sexually reproducing animals, in which all individuals must pass through a single cell stage. So the situation, I think, will be much the same for human social groupings. Groups might exhibit various levels of overall integration, but they will generally score very low on the metrics of reproductive specialization and genetic bottlenecking. Although there is variation across human groups, then we cannot claim that there is anything resembling hereditary or reproductive success. And indeed, one might suggest that to claim otherwise and to regard whole kind of nations or cultures as Darwinian individuals competing in a resource landscape was precisely the mistake made by the 20th century organicist tradition, which led in many cases to a disastrously racist perspective. So the naturalist has an easy option here. They can restrict their ontology to Darwinian individuals and thereby cut out the possibility of group minds. However, as I have noted, the terms biological naturalism uses to define life are generally quite non-Darwinian. They emphasize maintenance rather than reproduction. In these models, the key to describing what it means to be a living system is the sustained, autonomous self-production of a highly integrated unit. This approach to individuality is captured by the definition of organisms provided by Keller and Strassman, who suggest that the essence of organismality lies in shared purpose. The parts work together for the integrated whole with high cooperation and very low conflict. And as Peter Godfrey Smith again suggests, certain kinds of biological systems conform to this definition of life, even though they don't form parent-offspring lineages, including symbionts and holobionts. In such organisms, survival in one location of a network is highly dependent on the production of other parts. So these bacteria provide camouflage for the squid, and corals rely on the photosynthesis of their symbionts. However, these parts are not as mutually interdependent as those of, like a multicellular organism. The destruction of one component of the system is not necessarily an existential threat to the others, even though the division of labor of self-maintenance is distributed. So these are physiological, but not Darwinian individuals. The question then is whether social groups could count as physiological individuals of this kind. So think again of the definition provided by Keller and Strassman. Individuality lies in shared purpose. The parts work together for the integrated whole with high cooperation and very low conflict. And this means that not only the agent's goals, but the labor of constructing and maintaining its boundaries should be divided between the different components constituting it. Human groups in which a high division of labor enables the pursuit of a unified aim then, and in which the abdication of one component may compromise the unity of the group, such as a volleyball team or an assembly line, could thus be said to be loosely but legitimately physiological individuals, despite not being Darwinian individuals. A few objections might arise here. One might be that individuality simply cannot scale in this way. Although human organisms in a group of physiological units, it might be argued they can't aggregate to form an entity that could itself be described as a physiological unit. But this phenomenon cannot in principle be disqualified since we observe it in multicellular life and nested ecosystems. It's clearly possible for independent individuals to aggregate in such a way as to form a being that is itself and not as an aggregate, an individual. Another objection might be that in order to qualify as a physiological individual, the group must collectively pursue the goal of survival and distribute the labor of this aim in such a way as to make it each unit integrally reliant on the others. It wouldn't be hard, however, to contrive human scenarios in which fulfillment of group level aims is directly tied to survival, as in communities of subsistence farmers or troop units in a war zone or something like that. A final objection is that some groups, human groups in particular, are highly flexible. An individual can be part of multiple overlapping groupings with different aims and formations, which may dissolve and emerge rapidly. Individual humans may participate in many groups simultaneously, and it might be suggested that this multiplicity provides a clear distinction between group minds and other kinds of organic agent. It might be suggested, however, that to think in such an atomized way about the biological world would be misleading. So is a bacterial cell in the human gut properly regarded as part of the gut biome, or the human individual, or the human Darwinian population, or all of these at once? On the physiological view, multiple kinds of group minds could nest inside one another, just as their participants and in turn their constituents nest inside a multiplicity of ecological structures. So, while on the liberal view, all groups are biological individuals, and on the Darwinian view, no groups are biological. On the Darwinian view, no groups are biological individuals. On the physiological view, groups may be individuals under specific circumstances. So, I think the biological naturalist might protest here that mindedness seems to require a kind of integration that appeals to neither physiological nor Darwinian individuality seems to capture. So if we think again of the LSE's sentience criteria, we have this idea of integration. And on the strictest interpretation, something like sensory integration, as opposed to just mere physiological integration, might require a nervous system capable of integrating information from a range of sources. We see this idea in the theory of organismality put forward by Arnelis and Moreno, who suggest that a system is an individual if it can induce functional changes in its environment. And although in all living collectives there is some collective interaction that induces changes in the environment that contribute to the system's maintenance, it's only in entities with a nervous system capable of regulating sensory motor loops by generating complex behavior and controlling intercellular metabolic processes that we get this kind of integration center or self, which is ultimately the source of action. So could even this highly restrictive criterion for cognition potentially incorporate some human groups? Okay, this is going to get a little bit speculative and controversial, but consider a simple scenario: a group chat taking place on an instant messaging platform set up to coordinate an event such as a protest or a party. The messaging interface acts as an electronic nervous system, relaying informatic signals between the various components of the agent so as to allocate labor and synchronize sensory motor action. It also works to create a membrane, a boundary between the group and its surroundings, which requires energetic input to maintain. The group itself may, as a result of the distribution of informatic, epistemic, and sensory motor labor, possess and execute goals that are not shared by all, or in some cases by any of the individuals comprising it. And to be sure, this group has a level of integration which is, compared to that of a plant or animal, extremely weak. Members can easily sort of drift off from the group without compromising their immediate capacity to survive as individuals. And any group level aims or capacities will be correspondingly weak. But the group mind hypothesizer can claim, as advocates of basal cognition did with unicellular life, that the resemblances to more unified agents are mechanical rather than metaphorical. So, I think to conclude, the naturalist has four main choices that I've sketched out here. So first, they can claim that any biological individual is cognitive while adopting a liberal view of biological individuality. So that's where like just anything goes. Any biological individual is a cognitive individual. And on this view, groups do indeed possess minds. I mean, that's okay, so does like everything else. Um, but second, they can claim that only physiological individuals are cognitive. On this view, there are also good reasons to think that some groups possess minds, I think. Third, they can restrict cognition to Darwinian individuals and so cut out the possibility of group minds, but only by adopting a view that sits in tension with self-maintenance theories of life. And last, they can claim that only neurological individuals are cognitive, and it would then be a matter of debate as to whether any groups could count as sufficiently integrated neurological individuals. Okay, so quickly, why not simply embrace the possibility of group minds, despite how kind of unintuitive they might seem? Some theorists have done so, and so taken to describing the conclusions of biological naturalism in radical terms, such as cognition all the way down or mind everywhere. But others have expressed unease at the sheer theoretical promiscuity on display here. Is it not vacuous to imply that so many biological individuals are cognitive? We might worry here about a phenomenon coined by Sean Allen Hermanson in his critique of the extended mind thesis, cognitive bloat. Um, it may seem that proclaiming that there is mind everywhere in the biosphere simply dilutes the meaning of mind beyond utility. However, if biological naturalists do embrace a looser, more pluralistic ontology in which ecosystems are nested multiplicities of porous cognitive agents, then they will at least be in good company. So Michael Levin, for instance, suggests that most biological systems consist in multiple nested selves, and there is a reminder here. Oh, I didn't realize I was going to have sound. Uh, there is a reminder here of Ernst Haeckel's conception of multicellular life as a federation of millions of microscopic citizens, and of Rudolf Virchow's definition of an organism as a society of living cells. And even before the formalization of cell theory, organisms were regarded by some romantics as group minds of a kind. So Goethe wrote in 1819, every living being is not a unity, but a plurality. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much for your great presentation. We have a few minutes for some questions, and we already have a hand up.
Thank you. That was great. That was fun. Just first a comment. Not all philosophers hate group minds.
This is true. This is true. Yes,
Some of us
that's
are
true.
really sympathetic. Just not just for you, but for the whole group. You ended on a very speculative note about group chats constituted in group minds. There's really well worked out, actual, highly studied empirical examples. So I'm thinking of Edwin Hutchins in his study of navigation on ships, right? And then Mike Richardson has a whole series of articles on joint tasks and the way in which there are cognitive effects in joint tasks. So, you know, I would suggest people who are interested in this looking at this already published empirical work that would show you what kinds of integration are actually been established in the literature that would, I think, get you to take the group mind hypothesis maybe more seriously than some misguided philosophers do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, thank you. That's great. And I also, I think that work is amazing and cool. I guess I do think that there seems to be this kind of split where people are very happy to talk about things like joint intentionality and maybe even extended cognition. But then quite a lot of sort of literature in that area will like have this little bit at the start, almost as if it's like required, where they'll say like, oh, but we're not saying like actual group minds, like we're just talking about like shared intentionality or something. Obviously, again, that is not everyone, like, and some people are more sympathetic to this idea, or at least see it as a kind of problem. But yes, you're right. Of course, not all philosophers are hostile.
So then, yeah, it's an excellent point. So what I would do is I would add Richardson and Hutchins to Tony Chimero and Michael Silberstein on extended phenomenology. And you put all that together, and then you've really got a recipe for group minds.
Yeah. I think probably. Yes.
Okay, this might be a very naive question, but the only exposure to ideas similar to this that I've had before is work from Jennifer Lackey, who wrote a book called The Epistemology of Groups. I think it's by Oxford University Press. And it's a philosophy book, and it is about how groups have beliefs and groups can make assertions and groups can lie. And that changes kind of how you can think about both the knowledge that groups produce, but also the kind of blame that you can assign to collectives. And I'm curious if you can help me think how that connects to this or doesn't connect to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it totally connects to it. I think so that well, I haven't read the whole book, but I'm familiar with the Jennifer Lackey book, and I think it's like that would be kind of paradigmatic like work in this kind of literature of joint intentionality that I was just referencing. So a lot of the time, people are thinking about how we might be able to say that groups have kind of legitimate beliefs and desires and goal states without like attributing like further psychological capacities to them in some way. So I think it would probably fall into that arena. I mean, I think that the question always then for that kind of work in intentionality is like, well, what is the like special source of a mind beyond intentionality? Because some theorists are just going to want to say like basically nothing. I think this is kind of the sort of Dennett point, was that once we're attributing beliefs and desires to a entity, like that's all we're going to get basically. But I think what I was sort of trying to get at here is that even if we think that there is something more, there might still be reasons, if we go down this kind of biological route, for considering groups from that perspective. Does that help? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Great talk. It was a great example of meticulous analytical argumentation of considering all the possibilities, and I think I feel sympathetic. One point that was very interesting for me in your argument was that pointing out the distinction between Darwinian individual and physiological individual, and I think it's a great insight by uh, Peter Godfrey Smith. And then we have a notion of we could have a physiological individual that is not restrictively part of a Darwinian population. But then the next move is that to get from a physiological individual to a physiological individual with mind, we need neurology, and we don't have neurology in the case of humans. So that's make it a very unattractive example. And then the question comes back again, maybe to our very first step, when we want to have group mind. Uh, if it's a question of ontology, in none of these senses robustly we cannot have group mind. But what if we say, and I wonder what you think about this, what if we say, okay, so if I add the concept of group mind to this scenario, I can explain a lot here, and that's why I'm adding this. It's like, other than that, I think it's merely a semantic question. Like, do planes fly or only eagles fly? I mean, it's totally up to you. How do you want to use the term fly here? It's totally up to you. How do you want to use the term mind here? But if you convince me that, okay, take the Republican Party in the US Republican Party in the last 3 decades. If I add the concept of group mind here, I could explain to you some pattern of behavior or predict some pattern of behavior in the future in a way that you could not otherwise do it. Then I think you have a strong case to say, well, let's treat it as a group mind. Do you think those kind of arguments would be helpful as
Yeah,
opposed to just a
yeah.
semantic possibility?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, I've thought quite a lot about this, and I think obviously the difficult thing is like making the claim for it, like it being a helpful explanatory heuristic, because of course I mean, there is this long sort of tradition, like ever since the kind of 1910s and 20s, organicists sort of would basically inventing the discipline of sociology, like, and sort of presupposing the idea of kind of there being these group mind structures, then the kind of claim of like methodological individualists was like, actually the group mind like gives us nothing explanatorily. But I don't think that that's true, because I think that like you have these traditions, like things like ideology critique, where actually the understanding is that a group can believe something collectively that no individual believes. So that's the important thing. Like no individual like has. It's not just that we're projecting up in some way. We're saying that there is like a sort of assemblage here which isn't present in the mind of the units of the system. So a really obvious way of illustrating this is something like you can have a culture who's like behaving kind of misogynistically, and we might say that they have misogynistic beliefs. Even if you went and like polled everyone and you were like, do you hate women? They'd be like, no. What do you mean? But and of course we're used to kind of we've adopted different kinds of terminologies to deal with these cases. We talk about things like a kind of like unconscious bias and stuff like this, but it's like the unconscious of what? You know, like the unconscious of individuals, or the unconscious, the collective unconscious in some way. So yes, I'm very sympathetic to that.
Can I just add a quick note to that?
Yeah.
Just to add to that point, these kinds of arguments have been used very fruitfully in some areas of social sciences. A Canadian political scientist, I don't vividly remember his name, but he published a book, Canada Alone, in which he was discussing international relationship and foreign policy and relationship between Canada and the US. One chapter of that book, he argues about how the phenomena of Trumpism in the Republican Party is not a crazy rupture, but actually the logical continuation of the Republican Party. So against the mainstream, he was arguing that there is this Republican mindset that over time would end up in something like Trumpism. You shouldn't just say, oh, this is like just a contingency that happened out of nowhere. And then that's a good argument. Like if you want to understand geopolitical realities, if you have an idea like Republican mind, that this Republican, I mean, by Republican, not French Republicanism,
Yeah.
American uh, party republicanism, that Republican mind in certain contexts would evolve into Trumpism. And no matter if you have the contingent historical person called Trump that is there or not, you still get that. And that's a great explanatory advantage for historians and for social scientists. So I think I totally agree with you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's a great example. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a question from Zoom. So I'm actually going to flip this over for you.
Yeah, so interesting things. And I have a quite question. So I think you define mindedness as now say regardless of any problem solving capacities. So you essentially consciousness first in your definition of mindedness. So you define the mind through analysis of consciousness. Is that fair?
Are you asking whether I'm sort of defining mind in terms of consciousness?
Yeah. So is that the right understanding of how you define
Um,
the mind?
I don't think so, because I think I want to stay neutral on whether mindedness has to be something as strong as consciousness. I kind of want, with the idea that it's a kind of form of phenomenality beyond problem-solving intelligence, I wanted to sort of have a definition that most people could hopefully agree to, because even on a kind of functionalist account, I think you could interpret that just kind of quantitatively, and you could say like, oh, well, the problem-solving intelligence is going to need to be very, very, very complex before we have something that looks like a mind, if that makes sense.
Right, but I was thinking, now it's I guess, at least in my book, it means consciousness. So can something have an analysis without having any consciousness? So you mean, what do you mean when you say an analysis? Is it something different than consciousness? No consciousness, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is tricky, right? Because I think lots of people would have the instinct that you have, or the position that you have. But I think some people might not, and might say that actually, like, you can have forms of sentience, for instance, which don't require consciousness, but at a kind of more than just like problem-solving capacity. And I think in order to try and like deal with those distinctions in potential like stance on this, I think that's why I was using that definition, to try and like be able to incorporate those different kinds of perspectives. Does that make sense?
Maybe for some people, but definitely.
Okay, okay.
I just can't conceive how something can have sentience, for example, not be conscious, because, sentience, pain and pleasure, just forms of phenomenal consciousness. But okay, good, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your talk. That was really great. So I just want to follow up on the question Fareeb asked there about when applying the category of a group mind could be helpful and could help us learn about something about our target system. And I'm curious about whether you've thought about what the epistemic strategy for learning there is, and if analogy is something that you have in mind. So the idea being that if we understand a group as a group mind, then we can construct some sort of analogy between those sorts of minds that we understand well and import some of the strategies there to learn something about our new target system. So is that something you have in mind? And if so, what do you imagine it looking like, right?
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's really helpful because I think, and I was talking to some people about this yesterday, but I think the thing about analogies is that they can be better or worse, right? Like we could go like full pragmatist and just say, oh, well, it's fine to describe things as minds whenever that's helpful. But obviously the question is like, when is it going to not be helpful because it's going to lead us to some sort of unwanted epistemic conclusion, or like give us some baggage basically that we don't want. And I think like the kind of, so part of the reason for distinguishing between Darwinian and physiological individuals here is that I think that this use of Darwinian organisms as an analogy for human populations was an extremely like pernicious idea that like sort of had a lot of currency in the 1920s, and so I think like I guess while I'm sympathetic to the idea that there may be like great analogical work that we can do, like using the idea of group minds, I think we need to be really clear about what it is exactly that we're using as our kind of like analogical object, Does that make sense?
All right. This is fantastic. Thank you so much. Join me in thanking Georgie for her great talk. Thanks so much. And now we're just going to go.